The guards led Adjoa to the center of the square, where hundreds of people gathered, faces tense and silent. Whispers floated through the crowd. Some pitied the young girl, others feared her power. As she was brought before them, bound and accused of casting dark magic, Adjoa held her head high, her eyes steady. She had tried to save Dunkura, but now the king had condemned her. But just as the executioner raised his hand, a strange, heavy silence fell over the square. Dark clouds swept across the sky, blocking the sun, and a chill filled the air. Thunder cracked loudly, startling everyone. Suddenly, a fierce wind whipped through the crowd, sending people stumbling back, their voices rising in frightened murmurs. Then, out of nowhere, thick fog began to pour into the square, rolling in like a blanket, heavy and grey. The fog wrapped around everyone, so thick that people could barely see their hands in front of their faces. The crowd panicked, calling out in confusion. In the chaos, a group of strangers appeared by Adjoa's side, their faces hidden by hoods. Swiftly, they cut her ropes and whispered urgently, "You are the truth Dunkura needs. We will protect you." With her heart pounding, Adjoa let them guide her through the blinding fog. Together they slipped through the square, unseen and unheard. When the fog finally lifted, the king stood alone in the square, shouting furious orders to his guards. His face twisted in anger as he blamed Adjoa, convinced she had used dark magic to escape. But it was too late. Adjoa had vanished into the mist, beyond his reach, leaving only confusion and frustration behind. Unbeknownst to him, the mysterious fog was not Adjoa's doing at all. It was sent by the ancestors themselves, a powerful intervention to protect her and ensure her escape. Even Adjoa, with her gift of vision, had not foreseen this. The sudden fog, the hidden rescuers, her swift escape, it was all a surprise, a sign that the ancestors were watching over her. Adjoa's rescuers moved her swiftly from one hiding place to another, always staying one step ahead of the king's guards. Each place was a brief refuge, a small, quiet space where she could breathe before they had to move again. The king, furious that she had escaped, ordered his guards to search every corner of Dunkura. Day and night, they scoured the kingdom, checking every house, barn and storage room. The king promised riches and gold to anyone who would turn Adjoa in, while threatening severe punishment for those who dared to hide her. His threats were harsh, but the people who hid Adjoa were not swayed. They believed in her visions and understood that she had only wanted to protect the kingdom. To them, she was not a curse but a blessing sent to warn Dunkura of the dangers ahead. Adjoa felt a mix of fear and gratitude as she moved from one safe place to the next. She knew that each family, each person who sheltered her, risked everything. They could be punished, their homes taken, but still they chose to help her. In their quiet acts of courage, Adjoa found strength and comfort, realizing she was not alone. With each passing day, she stayed hidden, hoping and praying for the safety of those who protected her. The guard search became more intense, scouring every hidden corner of Dunkura. Adjoa's protectors grew anxious, realizing they could not keep her safe within the kingdom much longer. They whispered among themselves, and one night, under the cover of darkness, they decided it was time for her to leave Dunkura entirely. Quietly, they led Adjoa out of her hiding place, slipping past the guards who patrolled the roads. They moved silently through shadowed forests, guiding her along hidden trails where no one would think to search. Crossing rivers and wading through muddy streams, they traveled through the night, their footsteps hushed and their breaths careful. At dawn, they reached the border of a neighboring kingdom, a land unfamiliar to Adjoa, but filled with the promise of safety. Her friends hugged her tightly, their faces marked by both sadness and relief. "Stay safe," they whispered. "Do not let the king find you." Adjoa, her heart heavy, promised she would remain hidden, never allowing herself to be caught. As she watched her friends disappear into the shadows, Adjoa felt a strange sadness mixed with hope. She believed she was leaving Dunkura's troubles behind, but deep down, she felt an unexplainable pull. Though she was miles away, her fate was still bound to Dunkura in ways she could not yet imagine. After weeks of relentless searching, the king's guards returned to the palace, weary and empty-handed. They knelt before King Kwame, their faces a mix of shame and frustration. "Your Majesty," the captain of the guards began, voice low. "We have searched every corner of Dunkura. We've questioned villagers, combed through homes, and even scoured the forests and riverbanks. There is no trace of a Joa." The king's brow furrowed, but as he listened, a flicker of satisfaction crept across his face. "So the cursed girl has finally given up," he muttered, almost to himself. Perhaps she found a way to leave Dunkura after all. This thought brought him unexpected relief. Believing the kingdom was now free of her influence, King Kwame let out a hearty laugh, a weight lifting from his shoulders. He dismissed the guards with a wave of his hand, feeling a sense of triumph. The troublemaker was gone. Surely peace had returned to Dunkura. With this false assurance, the king threw himself back into his royal duties, ignoring the signs all around him. Though rivers shrank and fields dried, he paid no mind. He dismissed the illnesses spreading through his people as mere rumours. Villagers whispered that the kingdom was cursed, but Kwame ignored them, choosing to relish his wealth and the peace he thought he had created. Yet this peace was only an illusion. Dark clouds were gathering over Dunkura, bringing with them the consequences of his choices closer and closer. One morning, King Kwame woke with a strange heaviness in his chest. His limbs felt leaden, and his head ached as if weighed down by unseen hands. He dismissed it at first, thinking perhaps he had simply worked too hard the day before. But as days passed, the weakness grew worse, gnawing at him from the inside. His steps became unsteady, and he often had to grip the edge of his throne to keep from falling. His hands trembled, and his once strong voice grew softer, his words weaker. The palace healers were baffled. They tried every herb, every remedy they knew, but nothing lifted the strange sickness that seemed to drain the very life from him. King Kwame grew frustrated and angry, scolding them for their lack of skill. But deep down, a whisper of fear stirred within him. Outside the palace walls, news of the king's illness spread like wildfire. People murmured that the sickness was not an ordinary ailment but a punishment from the ancestors, retribution for his decision to sell the sacred artifacts. He defied the balance of Dunkura, the elders whispered, and now the ancestors are claiming justice. As the king's strength faded, his skin grew pale, his once proud face hollowed. He became a shadow of his former self, no longer the strong leader Dunkura once knew. But even as his body failed him, the king clung stubbornly to denial. He refused to believe his suffering had anything to do with Ajoa's warning or the artifacts he had sold. But while the king closed his eyes to the truth, everyone else saw it as clear as day. The kingdom was demanding balance, and it would not rest until it was restored. As King Kwame's strength drained away, he grew desperate. Once proud and dismissive of anything he considered superstition, he now found himself too weak to leave his bed, haunted by a fear that his illness was beyond mere medicine. At last, he called one of his closest advisors. "Go to the shrine," he whispered, his voice frail. "Seek the oracle's guidance. Perhaps the ancestors have words for me." The advisor bowed, knowing how much it cost the king to admit this need. He travelled to the sacred shrine, deep within Dunkura, where people sought answers from the ancient oracle, a spirit believed to hold the wisdom of the ancestors. At the shrine, a priest awaited, dressed in simple robes, his face calm but focused. The priest was known for his ability to communicate with the oracle and interpret its messages for the people. The advisor explained the king's suffering, his sickness that no healer could cure, and his desperate hope for answers. The priest nodded, closing his eyes as he began a quiet chant, lighting incense and offering prayers to the ancestors. As the smoke curled around him, he listened closely, his body still, his mind open to the oracle's guidance. After a long silence, the priest opened his eyes, his face somber. "The oracle speaks of imbalance," he said. "The sickness afflicting your king and Dunkura itself comes from a disturbance in the kingdom's spiritual balance. The ancestors say the king's decision to sell the sacred artifacts has severed Dunkura's lifeline. To heal, he must restore what he has taken." The advisor felt a chill run through him. "But Obiba," The man who took the artifacts has vanished." The priest nodded, his gaze grave. "Then your king must find him, for without the return of the artifacts, Dunkura's suffering and his own will only deepen." The advisor returned to the palace and delivered the oracle's message to the king, who listened with a mixture of fear and frustration. Summoning what little strength he had left, Kwame ordered his soldiers to search every corner of the land for Obiba and bring back the artifacts at any cost. But as days turned to weeks, Obiba remained elusive, and Dunkura continued to wither, just as the king's health slipped further away. As the weeks passed, King Kwame's strength faded faster than the hope of finding Obiba. His illness grew unbearable, leaving him bedridden and helpless. Each night, he drifted in and out of feverish dreams where shadows tightened around him like dark vines, and he saw the barren land of Dunkura crying out for rain. The ancestors' voices seemed to echo in his mind, whispering reminders of the lost artifacts and the balance he had broken. The palace grew somber, blanketed by the silence of his suffering. Servants tiptoed through dim halls, avoiding the king's chamber where even the air felt heavy with despair. Outside the palace walls, the kingdom's condition worsened. Crops shriveled to dust, rivers ran nearly dry, and the people grew thin and weary. Whispers of curses filled the villages, and people muttered that the ancestors were punishing Dunkura for the king's greed. King Kwame tried to ignore the fear clawing at him, but as his health slipped further, even he couldn't deny the truth of the oracle's warning. The wealth he'd gained from selling the artifacts sat unused in the palace vaults, unable to ease his suffering or the kingdom's decline. In his final days he lay awake, haunted by regret, realizing too late that his own actions had cast Dunkura into ruin. At last, with a broken heart and a weakened body, King Kwame took his final breath, leaving behind a kingdom on the edge of collapse. The people mourned him, but their grief was laced with hope. Now, with the king gone, they looked to the future and dared to imagine that a new ruler might restore the balance and heal Dunkura's wounded spirit. After his father's death, Prince Kofi, young and untested, took the throne amidst Dunkura's turmoil. The kingdom was reeling from hardship. Rivers had dried to thin streams, crops failed to grow, and the people's spirits had dimmed with each passing day. As Kofi sat upon the throne for the first time, he felt the weight of the kingdom pressing on him, uncertain of how to restore what his father had broken. The people look up to him with mixed feelings of hope and doubt. Some whispered that perhaps a new young ruler could bring change, while others feared he was too inexperienced to lead. Standing beside him was his mother, Queen Abena, who provided her steady guidance and quiet strength. Kofi also sought the wisdom of the royal elders, men and women who had served Dunkura for many years. They spoke to him of the kingdom's ancient balance, the respect for the ancestors, and the sacred relics that his father had sold. Patiently, they explained how the loss of these relics had brought Dunkura to its knees. One evening, the elders suggested he consult the oracle, as only the ancestors' wisdom could guide him toward healing Dunkura. Determined to be a better king, Kofi agreed, vowing to place his people's needs first and learn from the mistakes of the past. With the elders' guidance echoing in his mind, Prince Kofi set out for the oracle's shrine, a sacred place deep in the forest where Dunkura's people had sought wisdom for generations. As he walked the winding path through the trees, he thought of his father's mistakes, how King Kwame's greed had clouded his judgment, leading him to abandon Dunkura's ancient ways. Kofi felt a mixture of anger and sorrow, but most of all, he felt a heavy responsibility. He knew he had to do things differently, to restore what had been lost. At the shrine, the air was filled with the scent of incense and the quiet murmurs of prayers left by visitors before him. A priest awaited him, guiding him through the sacred rituals that would allow him to receive the oracle's wisdom. Kofi knelt in silence, his heart open to the ancestors' guidance. After a long, deep stillness, the priest spoke, his voice low and steady. "The ancestors say Dunkura's spirit will only heal when what was taken is returned. To restore balance, you must find Ajoa, the girl your father wronged. She holds the key to retrieving the lost artifacts and bringing peace back to the land." Kofi rose from the shrine, his mind racing with purpose. He would find Ajoa, hoping she would help him repair Dunkura and heal the kingdom's wounded spirit. Returning from the shrine, Prince Kofi called his advisors and loyal soldiers to the palace. He explained the oracle's message. Dunkura's survival depended on finding Ajoa, the girl his father had once tried to silence. Although she had been branded a threat, Kofi now saw her as Dunkura's last hope. Rumors whispered of Ajoa's escape to a neighboring kingdom, where she had been in hiding since that fateful day. But finding her wouldn't be easy. She had slipped away from Dunkura completely, vanishing as if swallowed by the mist that had saved her. Kofi sent out messengers with letters bearing his seal, asking them to search nearby villages, forests and towns. His message was clear. Seek Ajoa, the girl of visions. She is to be treated with the highest honor, for she is vital to Dunkura's future. He promised safety and respect, hoping she would trust him enough to return. Days turned to weeks, and the kingdom waited anxiously. The people whispered of Ajoa's courage and the vision she had tried to share. Many held on to hope that she would come back and guide Dunkura's new king. Meanwhile, Kofi himself felt the weight of each passing day, knowing that Ajoa's return might be Dunkura's only chance for healing. Meanwhile, in a quiet village far from Dunkura's border, Ajoa had created a life of peace. Known only as a healer, she helped those in need, content with her simple existence. Yet, even as she found purpose in her work, memories of Dunkura haunted her dreams, the kingdom's rivers, the dry fields and shadows gathering over the land. She tried to push them away, telling herself she'd done all she could. But one day, she heard news from Dunkura. The prince's messengers had arrived, carrying a humble request from Prince Kofi himself, asking her to return and help restore the kingdom. Her heart raced as she read his words, filled with humility and sincerity. Despite her peaceful life, Ajoa felt the pull of her homeland stronger than ever, its suffering echoing through her spirit. For days, Ajoa grappled with the decision, torn between the safety she'd found and the responsibility she felt for Dunkura. She knew she couldn't abandon her people in their time of need. At last, with resolve in her heart, she decided to return, ready to face the challenges that awaited and hoping she could help heal Dunkura once and for all. When Ajoa finally stepped back onto Dunkura's soil, a crowd gathered, whispers rippling through the people. Faces lit up with hope, and many cheered quietly, calling her their last hope. For the first time, Ajoa felt the weight of Dunkura's belief in her, but she also felt a renewed sense of purpose. She was here to help, and she would give her all to see her homeland restored. King Kofi greeted her with deep respect, bowing slightly, a gesture that surprised and humbled her. "Thank you for returning," he said, his tone sincere. Ajoa sensed his resolve and humility, and she felt the beginnings of trust between them. That night, after speaking with Prince Kofi, Ajoa lay down to sleep. She felt restless, like something important was about to happen. Finally, as she drifted into a deep sleep, she found herself in a strange, misty world. It felt like a dream, yet also very real. In the mist, Ajoa sensed the presence of the ancestors, wise spirits who had protected Dunkura for generations. Suddenly, an elder appeared, his face kind but serious. Without speaking, he showed her a path, like he was giving her a map in her mind. Ajoa understood, without words, that her role was to guide King Kofi on what needed to be done. Images started to appear in the mist. She saw a hidden valley, where Obiba had taken Dunkura's sacred artifacts. The ancestors showed her the safest path to reach them, through forests, over rivers and around obstacles. When Ajoa awoke, she remembered every detail from the vision. She hurried to King Kofi, describing everything she had seen, the valley, the hidden artifacts and the way to reach them. "The ancestors showed me the path," she told him. "You must follow it to bring back the artifacts and heal Dunkura." King Kofi listened closely, feeling grateful. With her help and the ancestors' guidance, he prepared to set out on the journey, knowing the fate of Dunkura depended on it. That evening, King Kofi reflected deeply on what lay ahead. He understood that this was his journey to make. The ancestors had chosen him to retrieve the artifacts, and he knew only he, as the new king, could face these tests. Each artifact would demand a true test of his character, tests that would either prove him worthy or lead to failure. With a small group of trusted guards, Kofi travelled along the path Ajoa had described. They journeyed through dense forests, crossed swift rivers, and climbed rocky slopes until they finally reached the hidden valley where Obiba had taken Dunkura's sacred artifacts. The first artifact, the wind drum, sat atop a tall stone platform surrounded by swirling mist. As Kofi approached, a powerful wind whipped around him, nearly knocking him to the ground. The wind grew harsher, like an invisible wall pushing him back. A voice echoed through the mist. "To claim me, you must show courage and resilience. Stand firm, or be swept away." Kofi braced himself, planting his feet firmly and focusing on the drum. The wind beat against him, making it hard to breathe, pushing him to his limits. But he did not turn back. He took slow, steady steps forward, enduring the storm's force. Finally, the wind faded, and the path to the wind drum cleared. With a deep breath, he reached out and took the drum. He had passed the first test. The second artifact, the fire ring, lay surrounded by flames that rose high, hot and fierce. As he drew near, the flames grew brighter, roaring like an angry beast. A voice boomed, "To claim me, you must walk with humility and patience. Rushing forward with pride will bring only pain." Kofi hesitated, watching the fire's patterns, realizing that it flared and ebbed like a breathing thing. He calmed himself, waiting for the moments when the flames dropped. He moved forward slowly, humbly, timing each step with care. The flames leapt at him, and once they singed his arm, but he held back the urge to rush. Finally, he reached the center, grasping the fire ring. The flames died down, and Kofi had proven his patience. The final artifact, the harvest staff, rested on a stone altar deep within the hidden valley. As Prince Kofi approached, the air grew still, heavy with an ancient power. The staff seemed to glow faintly, pulsing with the life it could bring back to Dunkura. But as Kofi reached for it, a voice filled the air, a deep, commanding voice that seemed to come from the earth itself. "To claim me, you must show humility and sacrifice," the voice echoed. "Your father sold me for wealth, ignoring the people's needs. Why should you be any different?" The weight of the words pressed down on Kofi, challenging him to face the truth of his father's actions and his own responsibility. Kofi stood still, humbled, knowing he couldn't simply take the harvest staff. He lowered his head, closing his eyes, and thought about Dunkura's suffering. His heart ached for his people, and he realized that to restore balance, he would have to let go of his pride completely. Slowly, Kofi knelt before the altar, bowing his head. "I am here not for myself, but for Dunkura. I do not deserve forgiveness for what my father did, but I am here to make things right, even if it costs me everything." The ground trembled gently, as if testing his resolve. After a long silence, the weight in the air lifted, and a warm light surrounded the harvest staff. Kofi felt a deep peace settle within him, and he knew he had passed the final test. When he rose, the harvest staff was his to carry. With the 3 artifacts in hand, Prince Kofi and his guards left the hidden valley, his heart filled with purpose and strength. The journey back to Dunkura felt lighter now, as though the ancestors themselves were guiding them home. Each artifact, the wind drum, fire ring, and harvest staff, seemed to glow softly, pulsing with the power and life they would soon restore to Dunkura. When Kofi arrived, the people of Dunkura gathered around him, their eyes wide with hope and wonder. News of his return with the sacred artifacts spread quickly, and soon the entire kingdom assembled near the sacred shrine. Elders, villagers, families, and children gathered, filling the air with eager, joyful energy. Everyone knew this was the moment that could save Dunkura. Standing at the shrine, Ajoa and Kofi held the artifacts with great care. Together they placed each one in its rightful place, honoring the wisdom of the ancestors. They began the ancient ritual, chanting the sacred words that had been passed down for generations. Each phrase was filled with love for Dunkura and respect for the ancestors who had guided them. As they spoke the final words, a deep silence fell over the crowd. Then from the dark clouds above, a gentle rain began to fall, soaking into the dry soil. The rivers started to flow once more, filling with cool, clear water, and the fields turned green, with tiny shoots of life emerging from the earth. It was as if the land itself had been reborn. The people erupted into cheers, joy, and relief spreading across Dunkura like a wave. Prince Kofi turned to Adjoa, his face full of gratitude. "You saved us," he said, bowing deeply. Adjoa smiled, feeling a profound peace settle within her. She could feel the ancestors' approval, their quiet presence surrounding her. Dunkura was saved, its balance restored. The people celebrated, singing and dancing, filled with hope for a new future. Prince Kofi vowed to lead with humility and to honor the ancestors' wisdom. As Adjoa looked out over the joyful kingdom, she knew that Dunkura's spirit, once fractured, was whole again, ready for a brighter, peaceful future.